Happy Saturday. We're going to try this again. Happy Saturday.
Happy Saturday.
One more time. Happy Saturday.
Happy Saturday.
This is Mom's celebration of life, okay? I get that it's a sad day. There we go. Now we're talking. I brought a picture of Mom. Probably seems like an unusual picture to bring to a memorial service. However, it's a very meaningful picture. It sort of captures her essence in many ways. I actually shot this picture 2 years ago today, for an event that was called One Day Tampa Bay. And it was put on by the Moravian Art Center, and they called all photographers, amateur and professional alike, to, for one day, go out with your cameras and capture the essence of Tampa Bay in whatever way, shape, or form you could. So I got up early in the morning. I was down at the Skyway Bridge to capture pictures of the sunrise and Fort DeSoto Park, and I spent the whole day out capturing photos. Well, one of Mom and I's traditions was on Saturdays is that I took her to get her hair done. And so we had a standing date, Saturday afternoon. I take her to get her hair done. So I knew I had to fit that into the schedule, so I dropped her off as I normally did. I went out and shot some pictures. I got back, and it was a little bit early, and she was still under the dryer. So I thought, well, I'll just take a couple of shots of her for the heck of it. Who knows? At the end of the day, I think I had shot 500 or 600 images. I had to go through and pick out 8 that I could enter. And so there was a total of about 500 images that were entered into the competition, and they had to pick 40 for the show. This was one of the 40 that they picked for the show. So she's famous, and she'll always be famous. In fact, in talking to the woman who facilitated One Day Tampa Bay, and I told her, you know, I'm going to sign up for it this year because it's happening today. So I went out this morning and took some photos, but I said I'm not going to be able to participate like I normally do because I've got other things. And her comment was, you know, one day Tampa Bay is not going to be the same without your mom around anymore. And I just thought that was one of the most beautiful things to be able to say. But I asked her about this image. I said, you know, I'm really curious. What do you think it was that the judges picked? Because, you know, I know it's got some great color to it. I know it's got a little bit of a retro look with the old, you know, hair dryer and the curlers, and, you know, I did it at an angle. And I said, so what was it, do you think, that the judges went for? They said it was none of that. I said, really? Well, what was it? She said, it was your mom. I said, oh, yeah, that's right. It was my mom. So I'm going to put Mom down for a minute here. And one of the lessons that Mom role modeled to us, in fact, we were talking at dinner last night, and we were talking, my cousins Carrie and Lori, who came in from Texas and North Carolina, and Roger and myself and Holly, my wife, we were talking, and one of the questions that came up was, what traits do I have of Mom and Dad, and what traits does Roger have of Mom and Dad? And I said that I think one of the traits I got from Mom was her sensitivity, because Mom was a really, really sensitive person. I saw Mom cry a lot. Some of it was unnecessary, I think, but nonetheless, she was not one to suppress those feelings. And so I grew up with that. So I want to let you know that I could start crying, and I don't want anybody to freak out, okay? Don't run up here and try to save me, and please don't run for the door to take cover. It'll be okay, all right? We'll all just sort of breathe through it. Just as an interesting aside, you may not know this, you probably don't, but today is International Peace Day, a peace day by the United Nations, and I just thought there couldn't be any more of an appropriate day to have this service than on International Peace Day, because if there ever was a person that was the essence of peace, that would be my mom. Today is also the last day of summer. Tomorrow is the first day of fall. And as I realized that, I thought to myself that, the seasons that we go through every year are very similar to the cycles of life, the circle of life. As the sun is now going to be leaving and we're going to be heading into the autumn and into the fall, and then there'll be a renewal. That sunshine that Mom had with her, and you that knew her, you know what I'm talking about. And if you didn't know her, all you have to do is look at the pictures and you see the sunshine. We're all going to miss that sunshine. We're all going to miss that love that she brought with you. My dad passed away in 2011, and Mike, the last time I stood up here was in 2011, and I would like to say that going forward, if we're going to do speaking engagements together, I'd like to pick a different venue and a different topic, if that's okay with you. But my dad passed away in 2011, and I found myself in this role, and I knew I was going to be in this role of being her primary caretaker, but I still wasn't prepared. And to be honest, I did not want to be in that role. I felt very ill-equipped. I did not feel prepared. And I didn't think I was going to be able to do a good job. And I also didn't want to get too close to her emotionally because I knew how much it hurt when my dad passed away. So I admit to all of you that when I first took over that role, I had a wall up. I had a wall between Mom and I. Well, Mom had a way with walls. She had a way of dissolving those walls. And somehow or another, over the course of the last 8 years, her and I became what I would call the unlikely buddies. We became friends. We hung out together. We shared stories. We told jokes. I got to see a side of her I never saw before. I'd like to think it was just a part of her, but I think part of it was in the aging process. You lose some of those filters. I actually saw her get angry a few times. It was interesting. It was always when the news was on, so I turned the news off. But I refer to myself as a reluctant caretaker, but what a gift I received from having those 8 years with her and being her caretaker. And now I find myself having all these holes in my calendar. In fact, typically on Saturday afternoons at 2 o'clock, I would be picking her up at the hairdresser right now. And I still have on my Google Calendar, Mom, hairdresser. I just had a reminder come up the other day to pay her rent. And there's a part of me that doesn't want to take those off the calendar. I'm not ready to remove those things from my life yet. Roger shared some of Mom's story. Mom was a depression baby, and as Roger shared that her mom died when she was 3 years old, her father remarried somebody who Mom referred to who was older and colder, and that's about all she said about her stepmother. When Mom turned 12 years old, she was informed by her stepmother that she would have to quit school and she would have to get a job so she could contribute to the family. Her two older sisters stepped in because they wanted Mom to finish school, and they found families for her to stay with. And so Mom bounced around from several different families so she can complete her high school, doing household chores and babysitting to trade for room and board. In one of those families, they happened to be Baptist, and they invited Mom to go to church. Mom grew up in a Catholic church, and her memories of the Catholic church, the only thing she ever told me is that it always felt cold when I went there. Well, her first experience at a Baptist church couldn't have been any different. It was like leaving Kansas and going into the land of Oz for her. She said they actually had fun at the Baptist church. They had a youth group and they did fun things. My dad was in World War II in the service when my mom first joined that church. And when my dad got home, and some of you might remember this story from if you were here for my dad's service. My dad when he got home, he went to his dad and said, "Dad, so, what's new going on at church?" And his dad, in his ever so savvy way, apparently said, "Well, there's this new young lady. Her name is Betty Bates, but don't even think about her because she's like way over your level." Now, I don't know what was in my grandfather's head when he said that. I don't know if he was playing a con game. Who knows? That did not stop my dad from pursuing her. In fact, that's exactly what she did, and they ended up getting married in 1947. 2 years later, they had Roger. 2 years after that, my dad got called back into the service, back into Korea. So he did 2 tours of service. And that was something that I only brought it up twice with my dad. I wanted to know more about his experience. And both times I got the same response, is that he shut it down real quick. There was trauma, I would call it, that he had compartmentalized and didn't want to think about. And he put that away in his life. Those of you that have been in relationship with vets or been married to vets, you know how challenging it can be. Dad, I'm sure, came home with some of that baggage from being in the war. Mom and Dad thought that they would have another child, to have a playmate for Roger. And so my stubborn streak started before I was even born, because they tried 2 years after, or 3 years after he was born, and then 4 years after, and then 5 years after, 6 years after, 7 years after. Finally, 8 years after, I finally gave in and said, "Okay, you can have me now." Growing up, those of you that remember Leave It to Beaver, we had a very Leave It to Beaver kind of family. It was really idyllic in a lot of ways. Mom stayed home, Dad worked. There really weren't any problems to speak of. It was a pretty normal family. And in families, oftentimes you have one child that is sort of the good kid, and you have another child that sort of is the other kid. Roger was the good kid. I was the other one. In my teenage years, for all of the... Well, apparently, maybe, let me take it back. I got caught, he didn't, but something like that. My teenage years, though, I put my parents through quite a bit. I started using a lot of drugs. I got arrested 3 times. The last time I got arrested, it was some very serious charges. In fact, initially it was going to be mandatory prison time. Mom and Dad found me a treatment program to get into. This was in 1976. And one of the stipulations of this treatment program was that if you lived at home with your parents, that your parents had to go to the parents group. So while I was getting treatment, and I was in this program for a year and a half, while I was getting treatment, they were getting their own treatment. And years later, what my dad said to me, he said, "You going to treatment was one of the greatest things that ever happened to your mom and I." Because I found out that in those groups, Mom learned how to stand up to Dad. Mom found her voice. She found her power. Dad no longer could just walk all over her as he had done in the past. Mom and Dad moved down here to Florida in 1976, I believe it was, latter part of 1976. I finished up my treatment. Unfortunately, I had a relapse. And all those horror stories you've heard about methamphetamine and cocaine, I can tell you that they're true. They're terrible. That's what I relapsed with. And I remember calling up Mom and Dad in the latter part of 1978. I don't really remember how the conversation went, but telling them that I didn't have a job and my girlfriend had left me and I didn't have any money, and would it be okay if I came back, moved to Florida and moved in with them for a while? And they said yes. And, there's a lot of parents that may have said no if they had gone through everything I put my parents through. But that wasn't my mom and that wasn't my dad. They said, no, come to Florida. And so I came to Florida in 1979. I was planning to stay here for a year, get my act together, and then I was going to go on to bigger and better things. Those of you that have been in Florida a while, you know how it grows on you. So here I stand 40 years later. I'm still getting my act together and still deciding, I guess, what I'm going to do next. I want to forewarn you, I have a little bit of what's called grief brain. And grief brain is like when you're walking through your house and all of a sudden you forget where you're going and you're in the middle of a conversation and you forget what you're saying and you're driving down the road and you forget where you're going. Well, I got a little bit of that right now. So if I jump around, I'm just going to forewarn you. And I have a feeling I may start jumping around a little bit right now. Over the last several years, one of the things I noticed about Mom is that she became less religious and she became more spiritual. And let me share with you what I mean by that, is that not that she walked away from her faith at all, nothing like that. She added to her faith. She began to read some things and incorporate things into her life that she found inspirational. In fact, in going through her things, I found books, some of the inspirational books that are the same books that I read, things that are uplifting. I was a member of this church for about 7 years. I got married in this church, and unfortunately I went through a divorce. And as I went through the divorce process and I started to examine my life, I left this church because I realized that it didn't fit what I was looking for any longer. And I've been on a spiritual journey since then, and I can tell you I have a really great relationship with my higher power today. So none of you need to ask me to come back to the church because I'm good, okay? But I shared with my mom, and my dad had a much harder time with it than my mom did. And so I found myself having a lot of conversations with my mom. I shared with her as I started to study some of the Native American spirituality. I shared it with her. Well, guess what some of the news clippings to me started to be? Oh yeah, if there was anything in the paper that had anything to do with Native American culture, Native American spirituality, there was actually a box that had my name on it. It went in the Ken box. I told her that I started to really appreciate some of the teachings of Buddhism. Buddhist articles ended up in my box. I started to practice yoga, and I told her, I said, it's based on some Hindu teachings, and I really think that, there's some truth to these Hindu teachings, and started getting things in my box that had to do with yoga and Hindu. And I saw my mom sort of embrace this path that I was on and not have any judgment about it. She really gave me permission to be myself and to figure out my own path. In going through Mom's belongings, and Roger told you that there are many boxes that are still left. We've already gone through, which I think is the bigger part of it, and got rid of a lot of junk, if you will. But there were so many little pieces of paper that Mom had with little writings on them, and I wanted to just share a few of them with you. I'm going to call them Momisms, okay? And they're not things that she necessarily made up, although I think some of them she did. But you remember the one day at the time calendars? Well, Mom recycled them. She would turn them over and she would write these little affirmations on the back of them. So here's one. On the top it says, enjoy life. Treat everyone you meet like you want to be treated. And there's part 2, make new friends but cherish the old ones. And then after that, there's a little smiley face with little curly hair on it, and that was her self-portrait. And then she signed it with her name, Betty. So she was writing these little notes to herself. Another one, never give up on anyone. Miracles happen every day. Be the first to say hello. Be forgiving of yourself and others. This one, she made a note that she saw it on the Lake Seminole Presbyterian Church. Don't give up. Moses was once a basket case. I wasn't sure how that was going to go over. Okay. To err is human, but when the eraser wears out ahead of the pencil, you are overdoing it. A hug is a great gift. One size fits all and is easy to exchange. And one of the things, those of you that knew Mom, Grandma, Aunt Betty, she was a hugger. Dear God, help me to remember that every friend is a gift from you to be cherished. This is a great one. Be careful how you live. You may be the only Bible some people ever read. And she followed that up with, do all the good that you can, by all the means that you can, in all the ways that you can, in all the places that you can, at all the times that you can, to all the people that you can, and for as long as you ever can. And Mom did that. There's also an African proverb that I came across. When a mountain is in your path, do not sit at its foot and cry. Get up and climb it. One of the things that Mom was really into is that Mom was a foodie. Mom was one of the original foodies, and what I mean by a foodie is that she really got into food. She wanted to understand it. I remember in the mid-70s, before tofu was even called tofu, Mom bought, and I believe it was called ground soy protein or something like that. Mom read about it and read about all of the health characteristics and thought it would be a wonderful idea to make a meatloaf with this newfound health food. And she did. And I remember Dad and I sitting down at the table. I think you had already moved out, Roger. And both Dad and I took a bite out of it at about the same time. And yeah, you're shaking your head, David. That's like our reaction, like, ooh. And Dad's comment was, what is this gobbledygook? Now, I don't know that I ever heard the word gobbledygook before, but that was not a good word. That was the last time she made that. But Mom was taking vitamins before vitamins were cool, and minerals and supplements. I found in one of her clippings, okay, this was out of the bulletin here, Christian Training Seminars from 1980. Passport to a New Way of Eating, led by Betty Donaldson. Join the revolution. Its drumbeats are echoing across this land, a call back to live foods and national health. Its banner is an apron, its weapon, kitchen cutlery, its soldiers, an army of ex-junk food addicts. Be prepared for changes in your life and eating habits. 1980. There were no health food books out then. Mom was doing that stuff. One of the other things I found was another clipping, and I believe it was from the newsletter here, and I want to read it to you. If you go to Yellowstone National Park, you will see Old Faithful. If you go to Seminole First Baptist Church, you will see the Old Faithfuls. George and Betty Donaldson are forever faithful, helping in the ministry of our church. Betty was born in Traverse City, Michigan. George was born in Clydebank, Scotland. He was an immigrant. He came to the United States when he was a wee laddie, about 2 years old. Both grew up in the Detroit, Dearborn area. George served in the U.S. Army Air Corps for 2 years during World War II. When he returned home, his dad played Cupid and introduced him to Betty, who was attending their church. They married, and talk about faithful. They have been married for over 50 years. They were actually married 63 years when my dad passed away. Betty worked with the Federal Reserve Bank for a time and then dedicated herself to raising 2 sons, Roger, who now lives in Sweden, and Kenneth, who lives here locally. All 3 grandchildren live in Sweden. George's career was as a structural engineer and eventually wound up in management. He retired in 1987. The Donaldsons joined Seminole First Baptist Church in the fall of 1976. Again, I'm talking faithful here. Would you believe Betty has been the church librarian for 20 years? And by the way, when you all closed the library, Mom was seriously bummed out. I know it's just an evolution because nobody reads books anymore, but she was still bummed out. This is a volunteer position. The library has grown from a small room to a large room that houses 5,500 titles, 20 years. Wow. Faithful must be Betty's middle name. George devotes a lot of volunteer time to the food pantry ministry, which has a great impact in the local community. Together, they have a clothing ministry and conduct book sales for the D&D missionary homes. One ministry that has been rewarding and special to them in their life is the sponsorship of refugees. Excuse me. In the post-Vietnam War years, when there was a lot of bad things going on in Vietnam and Cambodia, they took on the responsibility with the church of sponsoring 15 Vietnamese and Cambodian refugees. Many of the refugees lived with Betty and George while they transitioned to life in the USA. They took Matthew 25:35 to heart. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. George and Betty, you have set the example for all of us here at Seminole First Baptist Church. You exemplify faithfulness. Thank you, well done, good and faithful servant. One of the families that Mom and Dad sponsored is the Chuck family, many of whom are here today. Paul and Susan came over in 1975. They actually came to Florida right after, or 1979, excuse me, came to Florida right after I came to Florida. So Mom and Dad had a recovering drug addict going through withdrawal and a couple of Cambodians that didn't speak English. We're having a party at the Donaldson's house. Paul decided to go back to Cambodia. He wanted to do some service work there. He worked in a school for quite a number of years. He's now retired. In 2013, I got an email from Paul, and I had printed it out for Mom, and of course, Mom kept the copy. And I wanted to share with a few of the things that he wrote. I called Betty this morning and was able to talk to her for almost 40 minutes. We had a good chat, and it brought back a lot of good memories. She remembers how joyful it was while Susan and I were with her when we first got to the States and stayed with her. We talked about how George and her had helped us learn about the American currency, learning to make change on the dining room table. Heard a lot of funny stories about that. He would show, especially Susan, I think, change, and then he would try to cheat her, and she caught on fast and said, no. She may not have spoke the language, but she knew how to count the money. How amazing it is for such a little thing as learning about money could leave great memories and carry on to this present time as we grow older. As she mentioned all of that, it refreshed my memories as if it was not too long ago. I reflected to that moment and many other occasions like that, such as the times we used to spend together on Friday night eating pizza and ice cream at my place when the kids all got a little older. We really enjoyed each other's company and joking around as we had our meal together. The most important part, as I thought back, was the love and kindness that your parents have shared and nurtured us with since the day we first arrived in the U.S. Most of the people who came to know us have disappeared. George and Betty had opened up their hearts to us, the strangers, and then stayed involved, teaching us the important lesson in life, which is to love one another, which we hadn't experienced before. They became part of our lives with love, honesty, and support that we need to survive in our new world at that difficult time where we had to start our lives over with nothing but a pair of clothes and a small bag. Later on, as our family expanded, my children became their extended grandchildren, and we bonded and grew together to have great relationships in which we value so much. On the behalf of the Chuck family, I want you to know that your parents have done so much for us. Not only just my family, but they have also supported and helped many other refugees as well. They are the most wonderful people that we've ever known. They are true good Christians because they lead their lives just as what they believe. One day after I picked Mom up from getting her hair done, I took a picture of her and joking around, I said, I'm going to put it up on Facebook. Now bear in mind, Mom and Dad never had computers, never had cell phones, so Facebook was like, what is Facebook? I said, well, I'll show you. Now I've been on Facebook for a number of years, and I probably spend way too much time on it. I'll be the first one to admit my hand. If you're not on Facebook, don't start. It's a rabbit hole you never get out of. But I posted the picture, and I showed it to her, and she said, so how many people can see that? And I said, well, I have 4,000 friends on Facebook. She said, you have 4,000 friends? And then I had to explain what Facebook friends were. I said, well, they're not really friends. They're just people that I've met online. Now, I thought that I posted some pretty interesting stuff and some cool photos. I would get a really nice photo of a butterfly, and I'd get 20 or 30 people that would like it and a couple comments. Put up a picture of my mom after she got her hair done. 50 likes, 60 likes, 70 likes, 100 likes, 20 comments. Mom became a Facebook phenomenon. I want to share with you what some people wrote when they found out that Mom passed. People that never met her. Well, I didn't know your beautiful mom. She was an inspiration to me through your sharing. I know many a day I was feeling down or low. I'd see her smiling face in one of your posts. This little note you just shared has hit me in a difficult time and has reminded me that no matter what, we can be the smile in someone else's life. Once again, thanks for sharing and continuing to share your beautiful mom. Your sharing your mom's adventures over the last years brought a smile to my face. I lost my mom 10 years ago. Seeing your mom and all the special moments you shared were very special. Through the sharing of your mom, I felt like I had a mom to follow these last few years. Your mom seemed so loving and sweet. She was the picture of pure love. We are all blessed by her smile. Thank you for sharing your mom. I fell in love with her just through Facebook, and knowing just how much you loved her brought a smile to my face every time you would post her enjoying life. She was an inspiration to us all. If you haven't had a chance to look at her obituary, which isn't really an obituary, it's more of a life tribute on the Dignity Funeral Home website, I'd invite you to do so, and those of you that knew her, if you'd like to leave a comment, a memory, we'd invite you to do so. We'd treasure them, in fact. Roger is the only representative from Sweden here today. His 3 children, who are amazing and beautiful. You did a great job. They shared, each one of them, on that memorial page, and I just wanted to share with you, since they can't be here, I want you wanted you to hear what they wanted to share about their grandmother. Dear, dear Grandma, you will always be with us in our hearts. We will remember your love and how you would spread that love to whoever you would spend your time with. We will remember always. Big hug and loads of love. Christopher, Tuva, Leah, and Jesse. That's their dog. I'm going to leave Jesse out. My beloved Grandma, today it's your funeral. And even if I'm not there in person, my thoughts and spirit will be with you. I'm so grateful for having you as my grandma. Even if we lived far away from each other, you always made me feel loved by you, and I want to thank you for that. You used to tell me that you were praying for me and us every morning, and I often thought about that in this particular moment, my grandma is thinking of me, and I'm thinking of her. And in that little space of thinking of each other, we met. That's how it felt. My love will always be with you, Hannah. And from Eric, I haven't got a lot of memories of my grandmother, not the photo-like pictures that you can see when you close your eyes. I grew up in a different country from Grandma, which was her name to me when I was small. She and Grandpa came to visit us, and we went there. This was something that I cherished, but I'm not really sure if the pictures I do see when I close my eyes are mine or photos I've seen later on. Excuse me. What I do remember is the feeling she invoked in me, one of being familiar, hospitality, warmth, and love. In every kindergarten, there is always one adult that the children seek out when they need comforting. Why that isn't always clear. It's like they radiate a sensation of safety and caring. That is my memory of my grandmother. That is her legacy in me, which I try to give to my children. Even if we spend a lot of time apart and lived in different countries, she was present. In letters and phone calls, all my conversations with my father had a mandatory "How's Florida?" section in them. You will be missed terribly. But I also like to think that the feeling you created in others live on through the people you've met and touched. And I'd like to share one other very special memorial. It's from Mom's hairdresser, Donna, who's with us today. In 2005, George walked into my hair salon to get a haircut. This was the beginning of a long friendship with the Donaldson family. He said to me one day, "I would like to bring my wife in to have her hair and nails done for our 60th wedding anniversary." I didn't have a manicurist on staff that day, so I did Betty's hair and nails. And when I asked what color she would like on her nails, I thought for sure she would say pink. Oh no, not Miss Betty. She said red. This was the beginning of a wonderful friendship. Miss Betty had a standing appointment with me every Saturday so her hair would be just right for church on Sunday. I always promised George he would never have to worry about Betty getting her hair done. I will make sure she's taken care of. I looked forward to her warm and strong hugs and our conversations. When she was under the dryer, I would show her Ken and Holly's travels on Facebook. She was always wondering how I could show her all that and how I knew exactly where they were. Lots of laughs. Betty, you will be missed deeply, but never forgotten. You are always in my heart. Big hugs. My life has been blessed knowing you and your family. Mom moved into an assisted living facility in 2013. one that she came to really enjoy and appreciate. And in 2016, they sent out a memo. One of the things about this particular ALF was that it has a couple of ponds in it, and it attracts a lot of birds, ducks, ibis, etc. And my mom loved to go out and feed the birds. My mom was a nature lover. And I believe a lot of my draw to nature is because of my mom. Anyways, they sent out a notice saying that the residents were no longer allowed to feed the animals, to feed the birds, because it was attracting rodents. Now, just as an aside, when you tell a group of people that have memory issues not to do something, well, my mom remembered, and my mom got depressed when she got that notice. That's how important that was. That's how significant that part of her life was. There was something almost spiritual for her when she went out and fed those birds. It was her way of connecting with life. It was her way of giving back in the way that she could. Just so happened she had a doctor's appointment that week, and I shared with the doctor, I said, they did this thing, and the doctor looked up and said, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah, Doc." I said, "What do you think about writing a prescription for Mom, giving her permission to feed the birds?" Mom kept it. "In order to improve the quality of life and daily exercise, please allow Betty Donaldson to feed birds at the pond and near the road. This is medically necessary for her health." Sorry. Two more things I'd like to share with you. One is, I got an email. My mom is the last of either side. My dad was the last sibling. He had two sisters. My mom had two sisters, well, three, one who passed away at birth, but two sisters and a brother. She was the last one. However, I do have an uncle, her brother-in-law, my Uncle Jack, whose son John is here today. Thank you for being here, John. Jack and I have corresponded periodically, and he always was very graceful and grateful for the things he had to say about my parents. And he sent this in the last email. Thankful for the life of Betty Donaldson. Betty and her sisters, Shirley and Jerry, were always very close in relationships, as most sisters are. After Jerry and I were married in 1942, Betty lived with us in Detroit, and soon a young man named George Donaldson came to visit on a rather regular basis. I was about a year older than George. We both served in World War II. George and Betty were married in 1947. The years went by and our two families became geographically far apart. We lived in Middleville, Michigan, and George and Betty lived in Florida. We were still in close contact with love. I recall especially a trip that the four of us took out west in 1990, including a visit to Shirley and her husband in Sequim, Washington. We saw the devastation at Mount St. Helens, Black Hills, South Dakota, and many other places I can't recall. We had 4 weeks of pure enjoyment together. 10 more years went by, and on March 26, 2000, Jerry suffered a massive stroke that left her in a vegetative state. After a few days in the hospital, we set up a hospital bed in our living room with necessary equipment. George and Betty arrived from Florida 2 days later, on March 28th. And immediately helped in so many ways. Jerry survived until April 21st. The funeral was 4 days later. George, and especially Betty, felt such a need for me at this devastating time. But I know that she and George wanted to fill that need at such a time. They didn't leave to go back home until May 8th, 2000, when they felt like I could adjust to life without Jerry. I have been and will forever be grateful for the lives of Betty and George at my time of great need and beyond. Jack Spencer. Nobody got up and left. Good. I'm glad I didn't scare you away. So I want to close with this. Mom, you're the one who gave me my life and also the one who dealt with my strife. At every bend so gentle and kind, a loving heart and a God-centered mind. You did so much for me and for others. In your world, we're all sisters and brothers. You came from nothing, and for nothing you longed. Your commitment to life was to right every wrong. You gave and then gave some more, because that's who you are, yes, right to your core. Everyone loves you, and how could they not? Loves who you are and loves what you taught. I'll miss you, sweet Mom. Our laughs and our talks, and feeding the birds on our little walks. I'll miss your big hugs and your sweet little smile. No longer can I say, I'll be over in just a little while. But the biggest loss goes way beyond me. Yes, the biggest loss is to humanity. Who will now sow those seeds of pure love as an angel of mercy and a gentle peace dove? Who will now stop and help those in needs? Who will continue all those good deeds? I'll do my best to pay forward your life, to spread your goodwill and forgive where there's strife. And I know many others of whom you did touch will continue your work because they love you so much. The world needs your love, your goodness, your joy. But now it's time for goodbye from your baby boy. Yes, I now do say the sweetest goodbye. I'll miss looking at those loving blue eyes. Those eyes that were open, deep to your soul. Goodbye, sweet Mom. You've made my life whole. Thank you.